Choosing the right peripherals, accessories, or hardware to competitive gaming is super challenging, and when it comes to Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2, there are objective benefits to utilizing certain pieces of equipment that can give you a competitive edge in-game. The saying goes that a good craftsman never blames their tools, but when it comes to something like Warzone, there really are some upsides to utilizing certain displays, headsets, and other pieces of equipment that can generally improve the overall quality of your gameplay. Now, whilst no single hardware purchase is going to immediately make you a better player, the combination of a better quality of experience can make even the sweatiest of lobbies a little bit easier. We know that Warzone is inevitably going to carry on with skill-based matchmaking in Modern Warfare 2 and in Warzone 2, so having the best hardware can be really beneficial, and I'm going to give you guys all of the lowdown on everything that you could possibly get that could improve your game in Warzone. I'm going to start off with some basic accessories and peripherals that most people can get their hands on, and then work my way up to slightly more complex scenarios, monitors, displays, and PC hardware that does have objective performance benefits. The most obvious objective change you can make to your setup is your audio hardware. Even if a game has shoddy audio or doesn't do a great job with positional audio, having a better headset or better set of audio devices can generally improve your performance in-game, especially in games like Warzone and Warzone 2, where having positions of players in Battle Royale situations can be really key. There are thousands of gaming headsets on the market, many of them offering gimmicks that don't really make any objective change or really benefit anything you hear audio-wise. Things like virtualized surround sound or spatial audio awareness or all of these other various bits and pieces that claim to offer some kind of benefit to your audio don't really do much at all. There are, however, 3 objective things that can make the situation in Warzone 2 much easier for you. The first is audio mixing, the second is the profile of the headphone that you are using and whether it's an open, closed, or semi-back headphone, and the third is the general audio quality of the brand. Audio mixing is super important, and this is the first key component of any good headset. Now, players on PC will be less familiar with this because primarily most players on PC can utilize a number of audio softwares to control the balancing of audio from voice chat as well as audio in-game. When you're playing a competitive title, you don't want your teammates' audio to drown you out when you're trying to listen for footsteps or trying to get general comms on a situation. And the ability to have an audio mixer on console and on PC is super important. There are a number of headsets out there such as the SteelSeries headsets, the Astro headsets, and even some of the JBL Quantum range, which offer an inbuilt audio mixer, allowing you to balance the game audio with the audio of your teammates. Now again, whilst on PC this is less important because you can do this primarily through software, on consoles it's a little bit trickier, and having a dedicated hardware slider can be really important. The party chat interfaces on PlayStation and Xbox do allow for some audio balance, but not nearly as much as you can achieve with a dedicated hardware balancer. And more importantly, these do allow you to change things on the fly. If you're playing a more casual game and you want to hear your friends more, you can change it a little bit. If you're playing something more competitive and you want to hear their audio less, you can change it again. And many of them come with customizable EQ profiles as well, and primarily boosting audio from low frequencies and high frequencies in FPS titles allow you to hear more subtle audio such as footsteps, reloading, shots being fired, and other bits and pieces in between. Mostly footsteps, as they tend to be low frequency, bassy audio that can be very difficult to positionally identify. The second part is whether your headset is closed back, open back, or some hybrid in between the two. Closed back headphones effectively create a noise seal around your ears and prevent noise from leaking into the outside world, whereas open back headphones allow the noise leakage. And the difference between the two primarily is that closed back headphones can be more muffled, whereas open back headphones can allow for a wider soundstage, meaning that you hear a little bit more and the actual sound vibrations and sound waves being committed in the headset have more room to breathe and reflect out of the headphone, as opposed to being bounced back and forward inside a closed and sealed system. If you've never experienced these headphones experiences side by side before, you will notice the difference between a closed back and open back headphone almost immediately. Closed-back headphones feel so much more muffled in FPS titles, and open-back headphones provide a much wider soundstage, allowing for better positional audio and general better clarity of the audio that you're hearing. The crazy thing about this technology is how few people actually utilize it and how few companies actually utilize it as well. The only mainstream premium gaming headset that comes to my immediate mind and thought is the Astro A40 TR headset with the mix amp. That is one of the only open-back headphones available on the market, and is one of the reasons why Astros tend to sound so good, is because they have that open-back design that allows for a much larger soundstage. Now, there are some other options as well depending on the hardware that you're using, whether you're using PC or on console, and if you need a dedicated audio mixer. But there is, for example, the Audio-Technica ATH, which is a full open-back design with 53mm drivers, and Audio-Technica are some of the best audio providers in the business. The Audio-Technicas and the Astro A40s tend to be a bit more on the premium side, but if you're willing to combine an audio mixer with specific headphones, for example buying an Astro mix amp but using an alternative headphone setup, you can make some savings in that effect. I, at this present point in time, use the Biodynamic DT770 Pros, which are a hybrid between closed and open back headphones and are primarily used for studio reference. But the great thing about these headphones is that they have the soundstage of an open back headphone whilst having the noise isolation of a closed back headphone, which is obviously super important for me because I have a microphone which is quite sensitive to audio. Generally speaking, there are headphones or studio reference headphones which tend to be better than most gaming headsets, and that is just a strange reality that seems to have come up where gaming headsets have priced themselves really aggressively and pushed a lot of marketing, and because of that inflated their prices, whereas normal headphones or studio reference headphones have always been fairly inexpensive but offer really great audio performance. There are lots of options for these, and if you're a console gamer, the Astro A40s might end up being your best option. But generally speaking, there are loads of potential options, such as Sennheisers, Audio-Technicas, and Biodynamic headphones, which can give you really impressive audio at very minimal costs. Next is your input device or controller, and there are some general keyboards and mice and controller options that can make substantial differences. Having a good mechanical keyboard with a clicky interface that is responsive, connects well, and has minimal latency is a good option for PC players. Likewise, having a lightweight mouse which is wireless is also something great for PC players too. Most people tend to play on controller, and we will cover that, but generally speaking, if you're in the PC space right now, having a wireless and lightweight setup is a really good direction to go, but it can be a little bit pricey. At this current point in time, I am using the Logitech G Pro Superlight wireless mouse, which is a super effective lightweight mouse that is easy to move across the trackpad and is very effective in FPS titles. I'm also utilizing their G915 TKL keyboard, which is entirely wireless and mechanical and also low profile, which I do prefer. Having a wireless setup which is minimal latency, similar latencies to wired setups, and as responsive as possible is definitely something I would recommend to PC players. There are loads of options in this category, but just make sure you choose a brand which has decent customer service and reliability, and someone that can actually replace or RMA your products if something is to go wrong, and has decent warranty coverage. I'll list a couple in the links below again, but generally speaking, there's very few ways you can go wrong with these. I would primarily recommend stuff from Logitech and Corsair based off of my own experiences, but generally speaking, as long as there is lots of decent software customization and the software itself isn't complete trash, then there are lots of great options in this category. Controllers can be very tricky, and many people have pointed to my guides in the past on various different controller settings to get the best out of your controllers. And I am sponsored by a controller provider, Thrustmaster. I use their Thrustmaster eSwap S controller, which is a wired competitive FPS controller with back paddles, software configuration, and some of the lowest and most precise dead zones I've ever personally seen on a controller, which is why I partnered up with them. But as a disclaimer, that is the controller I use, it's my sponsorship, and it's why I recommend them. We've worked together for a really long time now, and I'll leave a link on the screen and in the description below so you guys can check out why I think their controllers are the best for FPS gaming, especially if you're in the Xbox market. But generally speaking, there are a number of controllers which can offer some benefits, and there are some things you need to look out for. I do really recommend the Thrustmaster controllers. I've used everything. Scuffs, I've used Astros, I've used pretty much any controller brand that has been recommended to me, I have picked up and tried. And generally, the Thrustmaster was the best for first-person shooters because it comes out of the box with a 0% central dead zone, allowing for key precision in a lot of situations. If you're looking into the controller market, there are 2 or 3 things that you need to keep in mind. The first one is software configuration, the second is paddles and buttons, and the third is reliability. Software configuration is super important because more sensitive triggers can be beneficial to reaction time, lower dead zones on your controller can be more responsive and more accurate and precise, and generally speaking, just having the ability to remap buttons and try some different controller layouts can be very beneficial. My Thrustmaster eSwap S comes with the Thrust Mapper profile, which allows me to make the triggers more sensitive, have 0% dead zones on the dead zone setup, and also rebind various keys to my back paddles, which are super important because it means I never have to take my thumbs off of aiming if I want to do something like jumping, drop shotting, reloading. There's never a point where I have to disengage from an aiming scenario. The second, as I mentioned, is buttons. Whether it's 4 buttons, 2 buttons, whatever the number of buttons you prefer on the back of your controller, having a handful of those is super important. Being able to jump shot somebody without having to spam X or spam A is a really critical importance in terms of winning gunfights in Modern Warfare, in Warzone 2, and it's something I do highly recommend, especially being able to configure those buttons as well. And finally, reliability. There is a reason I recommend the Thrustmaster controller, and that's because it's a modular controller, and if the thumbsticks die, you simply replace them with other thumbsticks, rather than replacing your entire controller. I mention this because numbers of professional brands who offer pro gaming controllers don't do this, and if your thumbsticks get drift, which all thumbsticks eventually do by design because it's an analog setup, then your entire controller is kind of a dud. There are of course other modular controller providers such as the Astro C40 TR, but generally speaking I've backed Thrustmaster because of their ease of replacement and just how quick and easy it is to buy replacement sticks pretty much internationally. Moving on to displays, and displays are super important as well. Having a high refresh rate display is critical for getting as much information as possible visually in game. But even here, there are more niches with certain panel technologies and certain technologies generally which are more useful than others. Now, I personally always recommend gaming monitors because having a smaller format display can be easier to identify all of your targets. I personally currently play with an Aorus FI27Q, I believe, which is a 165Hz IPS display at 1440p. Now, there are a couple of critical things about this monitor, which is why I've chosen it. The first one is a minimal response time. I think it has a 1 millisecond delay, which reduces the overall feeling of input latency because you're receiving minimal to no latency from your display and can increase your reaction time and make things feel more snappy and fluid. So that's something that's really important. The second is that it's an IPS display, which tends to have a bit more vivid colors, and having those contrasts and saturations in your display can make it easier to identify characters, identify players from shadows or dark situations, or identify movement more easily than something that doesn't have the same color range. There are of course other display options out there such as OLED, Mini LED, QLED, and various other monitor and TV related technologies that achieve the same thing as an IPS or achieve it to a better standard. Mini LEDs, for example, or QLEDs tend to be really bright displays which can be super helpful, and OLED displays tend to have really great color contrast, so there are lots of pros and cons. Now, when it comes to gaming monitors, I would say the IPS display is the most standard display at this point in time, unless you want to spend a lot of money. You can get QD OLED monitors, and you can also purchase mini LED monitors, but these come at a price range of in and around $1,000. And at this point in time, most people would rather pick up a small OLED TV as opposed to buying a small monitor with those technologies. Most people are buying LG OLED panels for in and around the same price point as a QD OLED monitor or a mini LED monitor because it just makes more sense financially to have a display that does TV and does gaming to a really high standard, whereas monitors tend to be primarily for PC gaming or very competitive console gaming. Resolution here is also super important, and I think 1440p is a great resolution to play at. It's a compromise between performance and frame rate, and at 1440p, next-gen consoles and PCs work extremely well. The Xbox Series X outputs 1440p at 120Hz as a native resolution on Call of Duty Warzone, and probably will do the same for Warzone 2, meaning you get a really clear image with a really high refresh rate, which is super important for receiving as much visual information. PS5s are also getting 1440p support, meaning that they will also likely output 1440p at 120Hz. And it's much cheaper to buy a 144Hz 1440p display than it is to buy 4K displays or buy expensive 4K 120Hz displays. I'll leave a link in the description below to both the monitor that I use and also the TV I use, which is an LG C1 OLED outside on my PlayStation, but there are lots of really good options. Primarily, if you're looking to game at 1440p, I think IPS displays are the best way to go unless you have a much larger or unlimited budget. So that's about it, and this is pretty much everything you could need for Warzone 2. There are some PC hardware things that you can do, such as using low latency RAM to increase your frame rate, which for some reason works really well in Call of Duty, but I will leave that as a link in the description below to an optimization channel called Freethy, who could handle this stuff much better than I could. Hopefully this gives you guys some clarity on all of the things you should be considering in terms of buying any accessories or technology to try and give you a competitive edge in Warzone 2. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thanks for watching, subscribe, we're on the road to 100k and we're getting super close, and I'll see you again in the next one.